Hey, welcome back. I'm Ibnul J. Farabi, and this is Underworld Kings, The Rise and Fall. You know, living in New York, you get used to a certain kind of noise. The constant hum of 8 million stories happening all at once. It's easy to feel anonymous. But sometimes, I find myself thinking about the opposite of that. About the places where everyone knows everyone, where the silence at night is absolute, and a single, terrible event doesn't just break the peace. It shatters the very soul of the community. That's what pulls me to a story like the one from Villisca, Iowa. A story that begins not with a scream in the dark, but with a profound, unsettling quiet on a bright Monday morning. It was June 10th, 1912. In the small, tight-knit farming community of Villisca, the Moore family had spent a lovely Sunday. Josiah and Sarah Moore had taken their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, to a Children's Day event at the Presbyterian Church. They'd walked home with their 2 young daughters, Lena and Ina Stillinger, who were spending the night with the Moore girls. The 8 of them had a late supper, and by all accounts, turned in for the night. The house, a white 2-story on East 2nd Street, fell dark. The next morning, that quiet. A neighbor noticed the Moores hadn't emerged to do their chores. The curtains were drawn. Concerned, she called for help. What they found inside was a scene of almost unimaginable brutality. All 8 people, Josiah, Sarah, the 4 Moore children, and the 2 Stillinger girls, had been bludgeoned to death with an axe as they slept. The killer had then covered the victims' faces with clothing, left a plate of uneaten food in the attic, and placed a piece of bloody bacon on the floor of the downstairs bedroom. The axe, which belonged to Josiah Moore, was left leaning against the wall. The front door was unlocked. The town of Villisca, in that single morning, was plunged into a nightmare from which it would never truly wake. Now, the immediate investigation was, to put it mildly, a mess. The local sheriff, overwhelmed, allowed townspeople to literally traipse through the house, destroying potential evidence. Within days, the governor called in the state's best detective, a man named James Newton Wilkerson. And Wilkerson, he had a theory. He became convinced the killer was a traveling preacher named Reverend George Kelly. Kelly had been in Villisca that Sunday, had even attended the same church event. Wilkerson's methods, however, were something out of a dark playbook. He had Kelly arrested and subjected him to a grueling, days-long interrogation, a 3rd degree, without sleep or legal counsel, until Kelly signed a confession so bizarre and theatrical it seemed ripped from a pulp novel. But at trial, Kelly recanted, the confession was thrown out, and he was acquitted. The real killer had vanished into the prairie night. And with no clear resolution, something poisonous began to grow in Villisca. This is where the story shifts, for me, from a horrific but isolated crime to a deeper, more insidious tragedy. Because without a monster in handcuffs, the town began to turn on itself. Paranoia is a virus, and in the close quarters of a small town, it spread with terrifying speed. Suspicion fell on anyone who seemed different, who acted strangely, or who stood to gain. A local man named Frank Jones, a state senator and a business rival of Josiah Moore's, became a prime target of whispered accusations. Wilkerson, the detective, now fixated on him, stoking the flames. Jones's own brother-in-law, a troubled man named William Mansfield, was also dragged into the speculation. But it wasn't just about specific suspects. It was a mood, a creeping dread. Neighbors started eyeing each other with doubt. The trust that binds a community together began to fray, thread by thread. The unsolved mystery became a ghost that haunted every interaction, every closed door, every shadow in a familiar lane. And that paranoia curdled into something even darker, the threat of mob violence. This wasn't just gossip over fence posts anymore. A group of men, convinced of Frank Jones's guilt and frustrated by the lack of legal action, decided to take justice into their own hands. They plotted to lynch him. Can you imagine that descent? From a quiet, God-fearing town to a place where a mob gathers to hang a respected citizen on the courthouse lawn? The plan was only thwarted at the last minute. But the fact that it reached that point tells you everything. The real fall in this story isn't just the fall of the axe. It's the moral descent of a community. The monster they couldn't catch became a mirror, and in it, they saw a reflection of their own fear and capacity for violence. The pursuit of justice twisted into a hunt for a scapegoat, any scapegoat, just to make the terrifying uncertainty stop. I think about this a lot, as someone who's built a life far from the town I was born in. In Bangladesh, in my neighborhood in Dhaka, everyone knew everyone's business. There's a profound safety in that, but also a profound vulnerability. When trust is your social currency, a crime like this isn't just an attack on people. It's an attack on the very system that holds your world together. Villisca's tragedy shows us that sometimes the aftermath of violence can be almost as destructive as the violence itself. The axe murdered 8 souls, but the fear, the suspicion, the failed investigations, and the lynch mobs, they murdered a town's peace, its trust, its innocence. It never really recovered. The case, of course, was never officially solved. Over a century later, we're left with theories: a serial killer passing through, a jealous rival, a deranged stranger. But for me, the enduring truth of Villisca isn't about whodunit. It's a stark lesson in what happens when darkness visits a place unprepared for it, and how that darkness can linger long after the physical act is over. It's about the human need for answers, and the terrible lengths we might go to when those answers are forever out of reach. Thank you for listening to this episode of Underworld Kings. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the fabric of your own community, I'd be so grateful if you'd share the podcast with someone else. For more deep dives into history's most compelling chapters of crime and consequence, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. This is Ibnul J. Farabi, reminding you that sometimes the most haunting shadows are the ones we cast ourselves. This has been a production of Light Knot Studios. Visit us at lightknotstudios.com.